Oh, hello, and welcome to Mind Renovation. So brought to you by this coaching source for institutional style property management of small multifamily rentals. I'm your host, Nathan Bush, and each show I share with you real life lessons about growing real estate businesses from my experience. This show invites industry experts, innovators, and influencers to explore the challenges and opportunities facing small multifamily real estate investors. We've designed this show to answer the questions you have about growing your real estate business. If you want more of these types of resources regularly, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel or head on over to www.nathanbushmba.com/subscribe. Or just go ahead and check out some of the other resources and the links in the show description. All right, guys, today we are talking all about the dreaded communication issue between property managers and real estate investors. Yes, I took a whole show to tackle this one issue of communication. And I don't know about you, but if you're anything like I am, you like to have regular communication. You want to receive updates and you want to know what's going on. And today's show is going to be all about that and all for you. I wonder if any of this stuff sounds familiar to you. Guys, does any of this sound familiar? If this sounds familiar to you, go ahead and put in the chat right now, that's me. All right. I never know what's going on with my properties unless I call the property manager myself. I don't know how many times I hear this. How about this? My emails and calls go to the property manager often, and they go unanswered for days. If you're a real estate investor and your emails or calls are going unanswered for days, maybe there's a problem. How about this? I get too much technical jargon and not enough straightforward updates from my property manager. Yeah, these can be real challenges. How about this? I only hear from my property manager when there's a problem. I'd like more regular updates. Or lastly, I'm not informed about maintenance issues until after they've been resolved and built. Guys, this is all too common in our industry. And I think that there's a disconnect. There's a major disconnect in setting up a communication structure that's most conducive to you. So many people want to jam square pegs in round holes, and they don't have a communication plan that's established with their real estate investor. If you're a property manager or if you're a real estate investor, you're not establishing a good plan with your property manager. And so today's show is going to be all about this conversation around how do I get better communication with my property manager, whether you're using a third-party property manager or maybe you have an employee that works directly with you. This show is going to significantly help you. But before we get into the show, I want to take a second and thank my sponsor, Red Maples. If you're looking for an institutional style property manager that can show you how you can achieve double-digit returns with your small multifamily rentals, head on over to www.red-maples.com/assessment and fill out the assessment. Start the process. Go through the process of learning about your portfolio and see if there's any ways that Red Maples, we can help you. All right, guys. Now, back to the show. We are talking about this concept of poor communication. Poor communication doesn't just affect the property management industry. Let me bring this up for you guys. I don't know if you remember this, but now Hawaii's coming back out, specifically Maui. Remember the tragic fires that went on in Maui and Hawaii? Well, poor communication, according to NBC News, stymied Maui's response to the deadly wildfires. The mayor said in state attorney general report that communication was the issue with the wildfires. On the day the wildfires destroyed much of Lahaina and killed at least 101 people, poor communication between Maui's mayor and top state and local emergency officials stymied the realization of how serious the situation was. I mean, I don't mean to start the show out in such kind of a down way, but you got to understand how bad poor communication can really be. It's not just about, communication isn't just about whether it cost a couple extra dollars to fix something or not. Communication, proper communication channels can be a matter of life and death. There can be serious consequences without proper communication channels being established. And so I think it's critical and important that we talk about what those communication channels are. But don't just take my word for it, because when it comes to business, one of the leaders in business, Harvard Business Review, had this to say: poor communication may be slowing down your team. And here's how they say that was happening. According to recent reports, employees gave their managers a mediocre 7 out of 10. In other words, a C on effectively managing hybrid and remote teams. Even worse, 30% said they're frustrated by unclear communication from their bosses. I wonder if your property manager feels like that from you, that maybe they're not getting clear communication from you, and you're frustrated that you're not getting clear communication from them. You know, I heard it said one time, and I don't know how true this is, but I think it's one of those truisms that stuck with me, is that regard is mutual. How you feel about somebody else may just be how they feel about you. And so it's critical that if you want to have good communication with others, you personally first take responsibility for the communication. Somebody that takes responsibility full out for their communication, we know this, right, is Michael Scott from The Office. You guys remember when he said this? Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope to find it along the way. Is that you in your communication with your property manager? Do you just hope to find it along the way? Or do you have a structured approach to how you plan on communicating with your property manager? Today's show is going to answer all these questions. It's going to give you a framework that you can lay out. You can take this to the grave. You can use this information, take it to the bank. This is, in my opinion, the best ways I've found that you can communicate with your property manager. And the first tip is make sure you connect clearly and communicate confidently. Connect clearly and communicate confidently. Now, why do I say that? Because establishing clear communication channels helps people to always resolve issues. So establishing clear communication, making sure you make the connection. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but I'll draw it out for you. In communication, it's critical that we understand that there is a sender and there is a receiver, and something has to take place along this way to make sure that the communication goes from the sender to the receiver. But oftentimes, so many times, what ends up happening is that in communication, something blocks the transmission, and the communication doesn't actually make it from the sender to the receiver. So what ends up happening? Well, what ends up happening is the communication gets lost in translation. You don't end up actually getting the information to the person that you're trying to get the information to. And so I find it imperative that you understand that first, is your message even being received? How do you want and need to be communicated with? That's the first question. How do you want and need to be communicated with? What's important to you? What are your requirements? What's the best way to get a hold of you? If the best way to get a hold of you is by picking up the phone and calling you, does your manager know that? If it's by text, if it's by email, what is the best modus operandi to communicate? That's at least got to be part of the thought process. How about this? How does the property manager want to typically be communicated with? How does that team member want to be communicated with? Are you in a position where that you don't know what the best form of communication or the most quickest way to get a hold of those people is? See, people will always be asking this question. I found this from a mentor from a long time ago, and it has stuck with me for years. People always ask this question: do you care about me? Do you care about me? That's how they're vetting your communication. And everything that you send or everything that you say, are you communicating that you care about the person on the other end of that communication? Do you care about them in your text messages? Are you taking time to make sure that they know you care about them in your emails, that you care about them in your phone conversations, that you care about them in your Zoom meetings? In your communication, it is imperative that you care about those that you're speaking to more than the money that you're trying to earn or make. If you don't care about people, how can you expect people to care back about you? So there's a number of different ways to communicate with your property manager. Obviously, the first way that you can communicate with your property manager, if that's an appropriate modus, is text communication. Text communication is not designed to have conversation. Let me say that again. Text communication is not designed to have conversation. I know we've all been guilty of this, having conversations back and forth with significant others whenever we're at work or trying to have a conversation with a team member via text message. It is not an appropriate way to communicate a conversation. Text messages aren't an appropriate way to communicate a conversation, just like IMs are not an appropriate way to communicate a conversation. Texts are for notification of urgent issues. That's how I look at texting. It's for notification of urgent issues. And are you communicating in that text that you care about the other person if you're communicating non-urgent issues with them via text message? Just a thought. How about email communications? Email communications are modern day formal letters. They're not for conversation. It's a modern day formal letter. Back in the olden days, you used to have to write letters out to people, put them in the mail, and send it. Now you can send that electronic mail to somebody. Now, here's the kicker. Nobody has time, because of the amount of emails that they receive, to receive a novel where you're trying to have a conversation with them. It doesn't work. The message is being lost in translation. The sender is not getting the information to the receiver. And that's all happening because you're not taking the time to care about the communication channel that you're using when you're communicating with your property manager. Or property manager, you're not caring about the communication channel you're using when communicating with your owner. And so text messages and emails are two different forms. One's for urgent, one's for formal letters. Then there's meetings, whether that's a phone conversation meeting or whether that's a Zoom meeting. Scheduling a meeting and having a conversation about something is a great way to make sure that you're establishing clear communication and that you're able to have that communication confidently. If you're not confident in something, that probably means that you need to sit down and think through your position or point of view before having that conversation. So if it's urgent, you know what to do. If it's a little bit more formal, you know how to handle it. Don't go on and on in those emails. And then lastly, if it's something you need to have a conversation about, isn't it important to schedule a meeting? Use email to formally try to schedule a meeting, or use text messages if it's an urgent meeting to try to schedule that meeting. And then lastly, the last form of communication that can typically go on in this tip 1, where we're connecting clearly and communicating confidently, is in system-generated reports. It's critical that you understand that a system-generated report is not a property manager communicating with you, or if a real estate investor has a system-generated report for a property manager, that is not a piece of communication. That's documentation. And so having the documentation isn't them trying to communicate with you. That's them making sure that you have the documentation of what's going on. It is a form of communication, I guess, system-generated reports. However, it's not a conversation, it's not urgent, and it's not the formal way of communicating what's going on in a specific situation, documenting what's going on. It's just documentation of what's happening. It's reporting historical information to you. So there we go. That's what happens in tip number 1. Tip number 2. Tip number 2 is stay informed, stay ahead. I'll say it again. Tip number 2 is stay informed, stay ahead. It is in your best interest and the property manager's best interest to have regularly scheduled updates. regularly scheduled updates. See, by having updates, you know what information you'd like to receive, and then you also know how you'd like to receive it. So tip number 2 is just make sure that you're staying informed. Don't not read the communication. Don't not read the scheduled report. Don't not go look at the information that you have access to. Do you need to get this information on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis? How often are you needing the communication to happen? Are you establishing that formally in your communication plan with your property manager? Do you need a weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annual meeting? You know, in the property management world at Red Maples, I think it's imperative and important that when you first interact with your property manager, you have more regular meetings. Those meetings can become quarterly meetings, maybe moving from a weekly meeting to a quarterly meeting once the onboarding process is established, once you feel your properties are moving in a good direction. But having the communication that you need should be established ahead of time. Again, do you want weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings, an annual meeting? It's okay to go ahead and schedule those things out months and quarters and almost a year in advance to make sure they're on the calendar so people know what's going on and what your expectations are. I'd be remiss if I didn't take a second to thank my second sponsor after that. My second sponsor is Web Insurance. Let Web Insurance be your guide. They can review your current coverages and make sure that you have the correct policies in place at the most affordable prices. And what their clients love about them is that every year they proactively shop your insurance to ensure you're truly with the most affordable carrier at the most appropriate coverages. From contractor to real estate agent, for all of those who earn their income via 1099, let Web Insurance be your guide. Go to www.webinsurance.com to get a quote from them. All right, tip number 3. So tip number 1 was to communicate clearly and to communicate confidently. Tip number 2, guys, tip number 2 was to stay informed and stay ahead by knowing the routine of which you need to get your information significantly helps improve communication. Tip number 3 seems to me to be self-explanatory. However, I'm going to go a little bit in depth on this tip because there's a little bit more beyond common sense here. And that was tip number 3 that you saw on the screen earlier, tech tools for total transparency. So here's one of the challenges that we're going to run into is a real estate investor and a property manager relationship. How much access do you need as a real estate investor to our systems in order to be able to understand what's going on? And I think the answer to that is total transparency. I think you should be able to look into our system and look up what your work orders are. I think you should be able to see whether your tenants paid their rent or not. You should be able to see your income, your expenses for the month. You should be able to look up in the system and find your leases. See, a lot of the communication that you're looking for is probably in the tech tool that your property manager already has, except for you're trying to bog down additional work that the property manager is doing with things that you could easily go in and get access to in the software system. So the first tip in tip number 3, tech tools for total transparency, is before asking your manager to look up information for you that you could easily look up, take the time to go review the information ahead of time. Again, before you're meeting with your property manager, before you're having that clear communication to make sure you can communicate back and forth and that you're confident in your communication, please take the time. If your property manager or your system allows you to look up the information, look it up. If you can easily find it and look it up, you should be able to look it up. And if you don't know how, ask a property manager, how do I look into the system to find this type of information so that you can communicate more effectively going forward? What type of information should be available in a system? I told you that. I said it should be income, expenses. You should be able to see cash flow reports. You should be able to see your leases. You should be able to see your collections. You should be able to see maintenance issues that are going on inside the system, whether they're completed or not. All of those things should be readily available for you as the real estate investor in the software system. Well, communication reports need to be automated. This is another important piece, right? What types of stuff do you need to see sent to your email and kind of that documentation standard so that you can easily have access to them before your scheduled meetings? See, by putting this communication plan in place, you're now going to get the communication that you've always wanted from your property manager. And if you haven't taken the time to draw out this communication plan with your property manager, I highly encourage you, take the time to schedule a meeting with your property manager and start going through tip 1, 2, 3, 4, and tip 5 today with that property manager on how you're going to lay out your communication plan. All right. So tip number 3 was technology tools for total transparency. Tip number 4. What is tip number 4? Well, if you're going to have good communication requires feedback. Feedback fuels future success. So tip number 4 is feedback fuels future success. See, there's importance in feedback. And many of you guys, the property manager communicates with you and then there's no feedback given. See, that's a problem. If you go out and you put together a documentation for an owner that they've requested and you send it to them and you get no feedback, that can be very frustrating. Feedback is what fuels success. Feedback tells the investor from a management perspective that I've heard you, I've listened to you, I've responded to you. Here's what I've found. Here's my information. You expect feedback from your manager. Your manager also, from a real estate investor perspective, expects feedback from you. If they send you a work order or some invoices, or they've communicated with you about a cost or a repair or a lease or whatever, the feedback is imperative. That tells them whether they're doing a good job. That tells them whether they need to speed it up, go get another bid. If you're happy, unhappy, you got to communicate the feedback to the property manager so that they know what's going on. By setting up a quarterly review with your property manager, now you can look at that feedback loop on a regular basis. Maybe there's communication that's been missed. You can catch that up at that quarterly meeting. You can catch it up at an annual meeting, but it depends on how urgent those issues are. So if we're using communication the right way and we're communicating effectively and we have more touch points for communication, the communication and information should always be available for the owner about what's going on with their property. But too many people mess this up because they just expect people to know how to communicate effectively with them. You got to share what you need in order to be communicated effectively with. So that brings us to tip number 5. Tip number 5 is respect and recognize and then reap rewards. Respect and recognize and then reap rewards. I don't believe you should communicate unless you're going to do 2 things. Number 1, I don't think in any situation you should ever communicate unless you're going to assume positive intent on the other person's behalf. What do I mean by that? That means that I don't go into a situation looking for trouble to create an argument because I think somebody was intentionally negligent on the other side. They may have been. But in my communication, I'm not going to communicate that way. I'm going to communicate with positive intent. If I'm communicating with a team member and I see that an error was made on a statement, I might ask a question about that statement where the error was made versus blatantly attacking that person for making an error. Hey, I saw on this owner's statement before it went out, I saw on this owner's statement where it shows $300 was paid to the trash company. I knowingly know the trash bill on that was supposed to be $30. I now have a question to ask. How come the trash bill was so much larger this month? When I do that properly, the team member on the other side knows that I'm assuming positive intent. Then maybe there was a trash bill that came across for $300. I don't know the answer to that. I do see that normally it's $30 and now $300 was paid. So I have to seek to understand and assume positive intent in those situations and environments. Are you taking the time to seek to understand and assume positive intent from your property manager? See, I think it all comes down to just this whole concept of showing appreciation and respect for other human beings. If you want to have good communication, you want to be a great communicator, you want to get people on your side who want to work harder for you and want to do more for you to help you achieve your goals, make sure you show them how much you appreciate them and make sure you tell them how much you respect them. By doing those two things, you're going to see that your communication significantly improves. Now, it's incredible that we don't just seek to understand, assume positive intent, and show appreciation. It's imperative that we understand how to do that. Number one, make it personal and make it count. Make it personal and make it count. When we're walking through the process of understanding how to show appreciation to somebody, make sure that it's not a generic, you guys do a great job. Find something specific about the person you're communicating with that did a great job for you and let them know. Otherwise, it's not really good feedback. It doesn't help your cause. Make sure you understand there's a right moment and a right praise. In some situations, it's not the right moment to praise. There's always a right moment to respect, but it's not always the right moment to share appreciation. See, if you're going through frustrating situation back and forth, and you're trying to superficially make somebody else feel better so that you can get your way, that's going to come across as manipulative, controlling, oppressive, disrespectful. Don't do that. Make sure that the praise comes after something great has been accomplished and you can identify that personal aspect of who or what was specifically done. And then spread appreciation far and wide. Don't just assume that telling your property manager that the guy in the field that's your GC that was doing your turnover is doing a great job getting the turnovers done in under 14 days. Make sure that you share that with everybody. Hey, share it on social media. Share it on emails to friends and colleagues. Make sure people know that the company that you're working with, the people that you're working with, that you appreciate them. Not for the company's sake. I'm not saying that so that you spread Red Maple's name, although that's a side benefit of us hiring great people and great people to work for our organization. I'm saying it so that when that person in the field sees it on social media, or they hear feedback from other people, they get appreciation knowing what a great job they did so they can continue to work hard for you in that moment and in that environment. Make sure your rewards resonate and that your results inspire. Make sure your rewards resonate and your results inspire. Providing rewards that hold real value to the recipient creates an effective environment for you to achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve. This could be as simple as a gift card. It could be, their favorite coffee shop. It could be if it's, an employee giving them additional time off, or even including them in professional development opportunities. These types of rewards intrinsically help stimulate and motivate the employee to want to achieve higher and better things for you. When they're recognized at the right time with the right reward that's going to inspire them. And then lastly, look, I always encourage peer praising. This is a powering progress. Peer praising. Create an environment where team members feel recognized for each other, where peer recognition can be incredibly motivating for some people. It's tremendously motivating for others. Some people, it makes them feel better. Other people, this is the only way they operate. So if you're thinking like Employee of the Month awards or simple thank you boards, that can facilitate some appreciation. But how do you cultivate an environment with your property manager of recognition, of reward? See, I know that some of you use third-party property managers, and that's okay. Using third-party property managers, you still have a responsibility for leadership. you still have a responsibility to lead others in the way that you want to be treated. And so by doing some of these things and cultivating an atmosphere and an environment that's healthy, that's based around these 5 tips, guys, you're going to get the communication that you want from your property manager. It's amazing how when you put a little thought into the communication, how much better the communication gets overall. Zig Ziglar had this quote to say. He said, "You can have everything in life you want if you're just willing to help enough other people get what they want." And you got to live by this. If you want to achieve something in life, who are the people in your life that are so important to you that you're supposed to be helping achieve their goals? You do those things, guys, and it will transform and change your communication with your property manager. See, property management communication isn't just about reports or getting an email update or getting a text message from your property manager when you want it. It's about carefully crafting the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And so carefully crafting these outcomes, you can do so by following the 5 tips that we talked about today. The 5 tips that we talked about today were connect clearly and communicate confidently. By connecting clearly and communicate confidently, you will be able to understand the right types of communication to make sure your communication is actually received and that the communication from them is actually received by you. Stay ahead and stay informed. That was tip 2. If you can stay informed and stay ahead, this will allow you to have those regular meetings, those regular updates, and help you achieve your goals. Tip number 3 was tech tools that for total transparency. So tip 3 was tech tools for total transparency. And that was how your technology should be included in improving your communication. Step 4 was feedback fuels future success. And so making sure that you're offering feedback and getting feedback when necessary, And the last tip number 5, was respect and recognize so that you can reap rewards. Guys, I hope that was significantly helpful for you. One of the companies that has great communication, great feedback, and great systems that significantly helps us is our third sponsor today, which is BBC Global Services. This is outsourcing that helps people like you focus on your superpowers. They're simple and on your terms with no terms, limits, or minimums. Get a free consultation by going over to bbcglobalservices.com if you are interested in a virtual assistant that is going to not just be a virtual assistant, but a company that cares, that communicates well, that provides daily reports to you of what your team members are working on and doing, provides managerial structure and backbone, and the team member to work within your organization. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take a second to announce my book on my live cast here. I wrote a book called The Caesar Method, and this is how you can unlock the secrets to explosive growth in your business. It talks about, in this book, my 6-step process that I use to achieve rapid strategic growth. If you want to know those 6 steps, just go get the book. You can get it on Amazon, which I think it's going to be significantly more than if you just DM me or put in the comments that you'd like the book. And I can get it to you for significantly less than you'd have to pay on Amazon. But I only got a couple of these books left, so that I'll be able to mail out until I get some more author copies in. So if you want one now, you want one fast, I have a limited number of those copies. Just DM me Caesar or put it in the comments Caesar, and I will make sure that you get a copy of my book. All right, guys. Well, that's going to bring us towards the end of the show. Every single time towards the end of the show, I talk about the importance of getting a portfolio analysis from Red Maples. Go to red-maples.com/assessment, and we'll review your rental portfolio to help you determine your next steps. We will review the profitability, leverage, and liquidity ratios of your business. We'll then provide you with a plan of action on the direction you should take with your real estate investing business based upon its performance. Should you sell assets? Should you refinance? Should you add additional property? Are there equity issues? Are you profitable? We'll help you determine all of those things by going over to red-maples.com/assessment and getting a rental portfolio analysis done. And that, Renovation Nation, brings us to the end of another episode. I'm Nathan Bush, your guide on this real estate journey of business growth. Remember, just like plants need the right air, soil, our minds need the right care. to build an environment and a life of purpose, passion, and growth. Don't forget to get your citizenship to Mind Renovation Nation. Follow us by subscribing to the email list over at nathanbushmba.com/subscribe. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and share the show with other friends who are as passionate about real estate business growth as you are, so they can join us every Friday at noon. So join me next time for more insights, inspiration, and of course, a little bit of that nation building spirit that drives us to create a community united by shared values, purpose, and a commitment to leaving a lasting legacy. Until then, guys, keep building, keep growing, and let's lead more than 25,000 souls to a life of values-based investing. See, values-based investing is an extension of the philosophy of doing the right thing. And in our journey of Mind Renovation Nation, we often talk about personal growth, ethical leadership, and making impactful choices. It's about being a steward not only of our finances, but of our values and vision for the future. Signing off from the heart of St. Louis, stay blessed, stay inspired, and remember, every day is a chance to renovate your nation. Have a good day, guys.